Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Business Structures, Legal Structures. We have closed caption below. And we welcome Priya from LCR today, who is with us to talk a little bit about the different ways in which you can structure yourself as a business. And I would like to remind you, if you've been to these webinars before, you know that we always ask that you use the Q&A function, not chat, because we monitor Q&A. So if you have any questions over the course of the presentation, Priya will address them. Just pop them into the Q&A box. And without further ado, why don't we? I'll pass the torch. Thank you, Priya, again for being here today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Chamber for inviting us. I'm really excited about sharing this information with everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. So I would love to take questions throughout. So if anyone has any questions or confused about anything, just let me know. Silvana, who is here and will be talking to you in the chat, and I work for Lawyers for Civil Rights. We help minority, immigrant, and women-owned small businesses through the life of their business on any and all legal issues that you might have. Either we can help you directly, or we have a really extensive pro bono network of law firms we work with, and we could place you with someone there. All of the services that you would get in connection with us is free. Or, if we really can't find anyone, we'll give you resources as to where you can talk to someone about whatever issue you have. So please contact us if you have any questions or anything. Silvana's going to drop some information in the chat, her email address and our intake form. If you have any issues, like you need a form an S-Corporation, which you're going to talk about, or an LLC, or you need some contracts drafted, anything like that, we're here. We'd rather you not spend your money on an attorney if you don't have to, and, go through the process with us so we can walk you through it. So today we're going to be talking about entity formation. And at the very onset, I want to talk a little bit about the different kinds of structures that are not, in Massachusetts at least, are not formal entities, but are just default business structures. So for all of you who are doing business in Massachusetts, but not, formally, so haven't filed or formed a specific entity, you're a sole proprietorship. In Massachusetts, if one person is doing business, they're a sole proprietorship. If that person forms an entity, like an LLC or a corporation or whatever like that, that's an entity. But if you haven't done that, you're a sole proprietorship. So that's the default status. Legally, the owner and the business are one and the same. So that means that legally, if something happens and if you're sued, you don't have the same liability protection that these other entities will give you. And so if you're sued, it's the same pot of money that you're using to pay your rent, your mortgage, your kids, schools, fees, whatever, right? All of that is the same money. And so that is sort of, spoiler alert, the main reason why you form an entity in the first place. But it does have some pros, right? It's easy. You just start doing business. For tax purposes, the business is not a separate entity. And so income is taxed to the owner in the year that the business or the person received it. So you're just paying self-employment tax, just like if you were a 1099 worker. So it's pretty easy there. Bad thing, right? Unlimited personal liability, which means that if you, start a business and you're a sole proprietorship and you don't form an entity to protect yourself, and you enter into a contract that goes wrong and you're sued, then it's all of your personal assets that are at risk. Another thing that some people don't like is that the business terminates upon the owner's death in a sole proprietorship. So you can't leave the business to your kids or your spouse or whoever in the same way that you can if you form a legal entity. But the pros, right, are that there's few formalities. You just go out there and sort of do business. If you have any questions, write them in the Q&A and we can get to them. So the default business structure for if there's more than one person, two or more, is a general partnership. So that means, and that can be you and your partner, your spouse, your cousin, your mother, like it doesn't matter your relationship to this other person, it's still a general partnership. And partners in Massachusetts share control and decision-making authority. And so what that means is that one partner's actions and agreements they enter into completely bind the other partners, which is risky, right? And so if your partner enters into a contract that you had no idea they entered into, something goes wrong, they get sued for, not performance or something, and then they skip town because they don't want to be liable for it, you are 100% liable for that then, even if you have no idea. And so general partnerships can be risky. There's a lot of ways to mitigate that. Some is forming kind of an LLC or another one of the entities we're going to talk about later. But another thing is a really strong partnership agreement that, regardless of what you decide for forming an entity or legal structure, is always a good idea to have when there's more than one person running the business. So everyone can know everyone's responsibility, who is responsible for what, things like that. The general partnership is the same sort of tax status as a sole proprietor. You would just be paying income tax on the proportion of profits that you're getting in your bank account from the business. A general partnership requires another separate tax return, but it's just a one-pager that is very simple. The cons are the same too: unlimited personal liability. And you can't really transfer ownership in the same way that you can if you have an entity. And also, elimination of a partner, which is a intense way to talk about death, but also, if a partner leaves the business or something like that, it just turns into a sole proprietorship. So it has few formalities, but it is, a little bit dangerous because you are taking on not only liability for your actions, but also your partner's actions. Massachusetts also has an interesting sort of set of case law, which deems that even if you're a sole proprietor, but you have, as those of you who know, who are sole proprietors, that first hire you make ends up being very important to the business because, they're kind of the person who's there with you for everything. And so often given a lot of responsibility, maybe almost the same amount of responsibility that you have, and other entities, right? Other businesses that you're in business with, co-backers, other companies you're entering into contracts with, might think that that person is an owner. And so what can happen is if the general public sort of believes that person's a co-owner with you and they enter into a contract, then a court could say, even if you didn't consider them a partner, that they are, for all intents and purposes, legally a partner in the business, and you are also liable for whatever contracts they enter into. And so, there's also ways to mitigate that with, an employee agreement and things like that, but it's always going to be safer to just form an entity to try and, get around this sort of unlimited personal liability. Are there any questions about sole proprietorships or general partnerships before we move on?
And just a quick reminder, everyone, to pop your questions into the Q&A if you have them. So, yep.
Okay, great. So this was all leading to this slide, right? Why form a legal entity? The two we just talked about, sole proprietor and general partnerships, are not legal entities. They're just the default. A legal entity will protect you from liability. So a lot of the things we talked about was if you don't form a legal entity but are just doing business as yourself, then you have unlimited amounts of personal legal liability. And legal liability protecting entity, right, like an LLC, a limited liability entity, will protect you and make sure that it's only the entity that is has its money at risk versus the money in your personal bank account. Taxation. Different legal entities have different things you need to consider when filing taxes. Management, they have different ways to manage and forms and things you need to fill out for management. And then continuation, as we talked about, some businesses you can leave to someone else, but if you don't form a legal entity, you can't, right? And so these are things, it kind of depends on what you are looking to do with your business. So we talked about this a little already. What is liability? It's basically the financial responsibility. So obligations under contracts, verbal or written, including, delivering goods or services, loan documents, lease agreements, any of that. Or if someone enters your business's property and they get hurt, right? They might sue you there. If the business is held liable and you don't have liability protection by forming an entity or something else, all of your personal assets, home, car, bank account, etc., could be reached in payment of that business liability, which is sort of why this conversation is something that's so important, because we want to make sure that you understand all the risks when you move forward with a business and don't form one of these entities to protect protect yourself from having this unlimited liability. Ways to protect against the liability, right? A Homestead Act. If you own a home in Massachusetts, you most likely signed this when you closed on your home, but it's basically protects your business up to your home up to a certain amount against lawsuits. I think it's $250,000, 250K, I believe, right now, but can be more under certain circumstances. If you inherited your home, I would make sure that you have a Homestead Act file, because that's normally the time that people don't have it. But if you closed with an attorney, you most likely signed one. Insurance, your business can have a really good insurance policy that pays out in event of a lawsuit, and that protects your own personal bank account. And then finally, what we're talking about today, use of a limited liability entity. And except in rare cases, only the assets of the entity would be at risk, but that's only if you both form and maintain and always conduct business in the right way, which is in the name of the entity, right? If you go out and conduct businesses yourself, then that sort of blurs that line. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So the first limited liability entity we'll talk about are corporations. Most big businesses that we come into contact are corporations. And corporations are separate legal entities formed by one or more individuals under state law. So shareholders are the owners of the corporation, and they get money whenever shares are dispersed, right? They get portions of the profit in terms of how much they own. Directors are in charge of overseeing the long-term goals of the corporation. And then they hire officers who are in charge of kind of the day-to-day operating of the business. And all of those people can be you, right? So if you form a C corporation or a corporation, normally all of those positions, you're all the shareholders, you're every director seat, and you're the president and the secretary and the, whatever. All of that can all be the same person. And then as you grow, you can ask people to join your board, you can hire other officers, things like that. Corporations have limited liability for shareholders, so owners. And it's easy to transfer ownership. You can sell a corporation, you can leave a corporation to someone else. The formalities when you're filing are the articles of organization and the bylaws, which you file with the Secretary of the Commonwealth when you form a corporation. And then the bad thing about a corporation is that C corporations, so traditional corporations, have double levels of taxation. So the corporation pays taxes, and then the shareholders all get their, their income as dividends on the shares. And then the individual shareholders pay income tax on their income. And so, that's a problem. I saw that some things were popping up. Did people have questions?
No, Priya, you're all good. People are just clarifying if you froze, but it might just be their connection.
Oh, okay, cool. I made this little graphic. Normally, if we were in person, I would draw this on a board, so bear with me. But to talk about sort of this double level of taxation versus a single level of taxation. So if you're a corporation, which is what we just talked about, let's say that your business made $100 in profit in 1 year. So that $100 is sitting in your bank account as profit. And then March comes around, you have to file your business taxes. And so your business, let's say, has to pay a 27.3% corporate tax rate. Then what your business has in their bank account after the corporation files taxes is $72.70. So then, as the sole shareholder of this corporation, that $72.70 gets dispersed to you as income, right? Because you're the shareholder, so you own all the shares. So you have that $72.70 in your bank account. April rolls around and you need to file your personal taxes like you do every year. Let's say your tax rate's 20%. Obviously that varies depending on you. You're left with $58.16, right? And this is the same pot of money as this $100 when it goes through all the taxes. So that's double taxation. That's paying tax twice on the same amount of money. An S corporation and an LLC, which are the two entities we're about to talk about, don't pay taxes at the corporate level. So that same business made $100 in profit this year. All of it is dispersed to you as the sole shareholder, right? So you have $100 in your bank account. April rolls around, you pay your 20%, and now you have $80. So you can see, even on $100, right, which isn't a ton, that this is a big difference. And so, therefore, you're more likely to want to form an S corporation or an LLC because you don't have to pay taxes at this corporate level. The most common question I get is, then why would anyone want to form a corporation? Big businesses have to form a corporation. S corporations are only for small businesses. So if you want to be a corporation and you're a big business, you have to form a C corporation. Also, lots of investors, right, depending on who they are, prefer the businesses that they invest in to be C corporations, because S corporations can only have one kind of shares or stock. And so a corporation can issue stock, preferred stock, where they pay their funders first or twice or whatever, right? But an S corporation can only have one class of stock. So that means when they disperse, everyone gets paid. And a funder wants to be paid first. And so that and some other reasons are why small businesses sometimes choose to go the C corporation route, because that's the only way that they can get certain funding. If that is not the case for you, I would recommend going the S corporation or the LLC. If you think it might be the case for you in the future, you can also even form an S corporation now and then change to a C corporation if you need to. Okay, does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions? All right, so let's talk about S corporations. So S corporations are the same at the state level as a C corporation. You form a corporation the same way. And then you tell the IRS that you want to be an S corporation, because it's only a tax difference, right? As we saw here, the actual entity is the same. It's just this tax you don't have to pay the business level. And so you tell the IRS, you make the S election 2.5 months after filing, within 2.5 months. So you probably want to do it right away so you don't miss the deadline. And you just tell the IRS, you fill out this form and you say, I want to make the S election. I just formed this corporation with the state of Massachusetts. And I want to let you know that I actually should be taxed as a small business an S corporation. As we saw, S corporations have that pass-through taxation, so you don't have to pay taxes at the corporate level, which is great. It just files an informational tax return saying, hi, I'm an S corporation. This is how much I made this year. I gave all of my shares to my one shareholder or whatever. The downside with S corporations is that shareholders and investors must be US citizens or residents. So that means if you are not one of these things, right? If you are undocumented or have some other status in the US, then it does not make sense to be an S corporation. An LLC, which we're about to talk about, makes more sense for you. Also, if you have family or know people in another country who might be interested in investing in your business, they will not be able to if they are not US residents or citizens. And so therefore, in that case, an LLC might be the better bet for you as well. And of course, corporations must withhold wages paid to the employee or the owner. And so in an LLC, which we're about to talk about, the LLC member, right, which is what LLC owners are called, are not technically legally employees of the business. They just live off their, owner's share of profits. For a corporation, if you are an owner and you're also working in a business, you're legally an employee. And so your wages are withheld, which is fine. You're going to have to pay taxes on them anyway. But more importantly, if you do not have work authorization in this country, then you're working without work authorization. And so another reason why kind of an S corporation doesn't make sense and an LLC makes more sense for you. If anyone has any questions, just write that in the chat and we can go back to it. The last of these three entities we're going to talk about is an LLC. So an LLC is a separate legal entity formed by one or more individuals under state law. It has a lot of flexibility in the rights of owners or members and how the company will be controlled. It has that pass-through tax treatment like we saw. So you're not paying taxes at the corporate level, just in your personal taxes. A single member LLC is disregarded for tax purposes. So that's sort of how an LLC gets that pass-through taxation, right? So like a sole proprietorship, which we learned about at the beginning, the government doesn't see a difference between the business and the person. LLCs are a hybrid where you get the protections of the state, like a corporation, right? The limited liability protections, but you get the benefits of a tax treatment like the sole proprietor which the IRS doesn't see a difference between the person and the business. So you kind of get the best of both worlds with an LLC. LLCs are readily transferable. You can sell them or anything like that, just like a corporation. You have that limited liability, right? It's right in the name, limited liability entity. It's some corporate formalities, but it's relatively simple. You just file a certificate of formation and an operating agreement. In Massachusetts, you don't even have to have an operating agreement. There's a statutory operating agreement that just sort of falls into place for your LLC if you don't file your own. However, the operating agreement, especially if there's more than one member of the LLC, is a really great opportunity to work on that sort of partnership stuff we talked about and think about all of the different eventualities of what may or may not happen while you're still kind of in a happy place with your partner. And so we recommend multi-member LLCs, right, which is more than one owner LLCs, have an operating agreement that can really work as a partnership agreement as well. All right, so a benefit corporation is a relatively new type of corporation to Massachusetts. It doesn't affect the company's tax status, so you can still make the S election. You can still only pay the one level of taxation. Just like the IRS, right? The federal government only cares about your S election. Massachusetts only cares about this benefit corp thing if you want it. You have the ability to register a mission when you form a benefit corporation. And you have to submit an annual benefits report to the state, basically saying like how you're doing with that mission, and also designate a benefits director, right? An employee or you who has to kind of be in charge of that. You know, it doesn't have a lot of benefits, to you other than you can use it for marketing. You don't, you know, we get a lot of questions like are benefit corporations like nonprofits or anything like that? No, you know, you're still paying taxes. You can't give tax deductible receipts or anything like that, like a nonprofit can. But you can tell your customers that you're a benefit corporation and that you have this mission. So I would say more useful on a marketing front than sort of any kind of legal benefits there. Also different than a B corporation, which is a certificate, like a seal that you can get from this company in the Midwest. You don't even have to be a corporation. You can be an LLC or a sole proprietor and apply for B Corp. And that is, and then you pay them $500 a year, which is quite a lot, to kind of maintain that seal. And then you can use that for marketing as well. Silvana, do we have any questions that I missed?
Nope, you're all good.
Okay, great. And so signature blocks. So actually oops. I went to the IRS website. One second, guys. I don't know what's happening here. All right. Okay. So let's go through this slide first. So for everyone, you're most likely going to need an EIN, which is an employment identification number for your business, even if you don't have employees. An EIN is basically like the social security number, the ITIN for your business. It's your tax identification number. It's very easy to get it, right? But you want to make sure you go to the right place. There's a lot of I wouldn't say scam, but websites that are not the IRS website that are charging you for it, and then they just go get it for you. It's a very simple process. You should not be paying for your EIN. It's very easy. Once you form the entity, right? So your LLC, your corporation, or your sole proprietor, if you want to stay a sole proprietor, you just go to here, right? To this link, or the most important thing, if you're Googling it, to make sure it's the irs.gov website. And go through the click through, right? It'll ask you questions about your business, very easy. And then at the end, it'll just generate your EIN. You want to save that document that it gives you. This website has hours, which is very strange. Like it's only open weekdays, 9 to 5 or something like that. But other than that, it's very easy. I would not be paying for an EIN. You will most likely have to have a doing business as with the city you're conducting business in. And that's really a connection for the city between the name of your business and your actual entity. Because if you form an LLC, you're forming it as something like Priya Lane LLC, right? Like sometimes kind of a boring name or generic name. And then you are actually doing business as something fun, right? Cupcakes, something like that. The DBA, the doing business as certificate, is that link between the name Cupcakes and Priya Lane LLC. And so you just file it with the city. You go in and you say, Priya Lane LLC is doing business as Cupcakes, right? That's what it says. And so if something happens, right, and they need to find the owners of Cupcakes, they have that sort of route. It doesn't give you anything really, but it's a requirement that you have to fill out. If you really love your name and you're really worried someone's going to steal it, but you're not quite ready to incorporate, you can reserve your name prior to incorporation for $30 for 60 days with the Secretary of the Commonwealth. And the most important thing is do not commingle funds, which means do not use the business bank account like your personal bank account. You need to really keep separate books. And we all know, obviously, in the beginning, you're going to have to be putting money from your personal bank account into the business bank account, because the business bank account won't have anything. But really, when you're maintaining your books, that should be a loan or a cash infusion or something like that. And hopefully you pay yourself back one day versus just moving money back and forth. And then finally, another things, right, is that personal guarantees, it does eliminate, right, but really erode your limited liability protections. And basically that means if you don't treat your entity like a separate entity, right, if you're commingling funds and if you're entering into contracts as a business, but you're giving a personal guarantee, it takes away for them from that limited liability, because when you give a personal guarantee, you're basically saying, I will be personally liable for that, right? And the whole point of this legal limited liability entity was to make sure that you are not personally liable if something happens. And there are always going to be situations like your first lease or your first loan for your business that you will have to give personal guarantees, because that's just the way it is, and your business doesn't have anything to sort of have collateral for that. But try to limit them. And that's why these signature blocks are really handy, right? You always want to be signing as the business. You want to enter into contracts as the business, not as you, right? And so say if you're a corporation, right? You're an Inc. At the end of your whatever contract, it would be signed by Best Business Inc., right? By, and this is where you put your name, right? So you're still signing your name, but you're signing on behalf of the corporation, and then you put your name and type, right? Same thing with an LLC, Best Business LLC, right? Oops. By Priya Lane member. You want to be wary about this stuff, right? And this is a general partnership, right? Same. But you want to really be worried if you're just signing your name and then putting your title underneath, because then you're signing as you versus the business. The business name should always be first. And so I think that's it for me. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, everyone. Michael here from the Chamber, just popping in to say, once again, thank you all for signing on. And if you have any questions for Priya or for Silvana, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A now. As always, if you come up with a question that you realize you forgot to ask, if in 2 hours you sit down and you're like, oh man, I meant to ask a question about this, feel free to email that to Thais or myself, and we can forward the email along and get you that response. But yeah, I want to do one last call for questions in the Q&A before we wrap things up. Just going to give it another couple seconds.
And remember to check the chat box for contact information for Silvana, who can connect you with Priya at LCR should you need any assistance from them.
All right, well, there's nothing else in Q&A. So at this time, I want to say thank you again to Priya and to Silvana for taking time out of your day to join us. We really appreciate it, and we know our members appreciate it too. Reminders for attendees also that a recording of this webinar will be going up on YouTube in the next day or so. So if you need to go back and rewatch anything, please feel free to go do that. If you can't find our YouTube channel, you can search MALGBTCC on YouTube, or you can just email us and we can give you the link, whatever is easier for you. Thank you for signing on. Keep an eye for Thais's emails and on our social media for updates about upcoming webinars and other programming. And as always, if you have anything you need of the Chamber at all, just shoot us an email. And with that, I want to thank you all again and say have a great rest of your day.